2013, I sent a manuscript to Random House for my novel Analog Men, which was the third book in a 3-book contract. And since that contract was completed, I then got to think, what am I going to write next? And when I looked at the ideas that I had there, I realized that the 5 ideas that actually really excited me were probably each destined to be about 20,000 words long if I wrote them the way they needed to be written. And I thought, if I cut them down, cut any one of them into a short story, I wouldn't be doing it justice. If I tricked any one of them up into an 80,000 word novel, I'd be faking it and there would be padding. So really it was either write them at 20,000 words each or not write them at all and write my 6th best idea instead. And I don't think a writer should ever be writing their 6th best idea. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that not only was I excited about those particular ideas, but I actually really liked the novella form and what it had to offer. The way it kind of goes deep without going long, the way you focus on a small group of people and a contained story and try to use detail to tell it as effectively as possible. And I recalled that my previous book had been a collection of short fiction called Welcome to Normal that had been 5 short stories and 3 pieces that happened to have become novella length of their own accord. And I realized that in writing those pieces, it's pieces about 20,000 words long that are about the biggest that my brain can stretch to in one go. So anytime I'm writing a novel, once I get past about the 20,000 word mark, I can no longer look back and see the beginning. And the end is too far away for me to see it until I get to about 60,000 words. So the middle half of a novel, 20,000 to 60,000 words, I can't see the beginning or the end, and I just have to hope that I'm doing the right thing, following the outline that I've prepared, and it'll get me to a point where the end is within sight, and then I can head towards it. But with a novella, it's got the complexity that I find interesting, but at the same time, wherever I am in the novella, I can see the beginning and I can see the end. And that is a kind of satisfying position to be in. So I really wanted to write them. I was excited about the individual ideas and I wanted to write novella-sized pieces, and then it was a question of working out how to publish them. And research led me to do that as a series model. And early on in the process of working on them, I spoke to a publisher who got excited about the idea, and she suggested some links between the novellas. And first I rejected that or resisted that, thinking it could be cheesy. But then I thought maybe if I can make it non-cheesy, it could be interesting. And I realized that sometimes a novella might be a chance to glimpse a character you've seen before from a different perspective and therefore kind of question what they told you. And I realized I could write it so that each novella would be its own thing and hopefully its own satisfying story. But if you read the whole series, you'd see those little connections and get other insights. And that, to me, seemed like a project that I was really keen to pursue. What a great question. Clearly, this is one that I can't possibly phone in, and this really needs some contemplation. So I found the review, and I'll just read an expanded version of that quote because I wanted to situate it in the review so I would really know what to say. So it says, the 5 works gathered under Wisdom Tree are distinguished by a sad sweetness rather than tragedy. Several explore the plight of children semi-abandoned because of their parents' obsessions. Others involve retrenched men, among them Tim in Juno. In Gotham and NoHo, there are unexpected intercessionary figures who bring grace and aid. For all their variety of incident and location, the novellas share an emotional weather alert to wounds, but aware that there are powers to comfort. So I wanted, in the Wisdom Tree novellas, to have complex, vulnerable people in them and to show what people can mean to each other and what connections with people can mean to get us through some challenging times. And I think now, this, of course, the question is really timely. We need to connect with each other in different ways if we're shut up in our own homes. Fortunately, technology allows us to do that. It lets me talk here now, but it also lets us Zoom and Skype and things like that with our friends if we've got access to those technologies. Otherwise, I hope it lets us talk from one veranda to the next, a safe distance away, because the powers to comfort, I think, sure, ice cream might work for a short period of time, but ultimately the powers to comfort are human. And I think this is a thing that fiction can provide by proxy. A work of fiction that is character-based and really connects demonstrates empathy. And I think it's that empathy that we can get from fiction, the empathy that we can bring to our reading of fiction, the connection of with the characters that can transport us, but that can also make us feel more human and make us value the humanity that we get from them. Certainly humanity is really central in my work, and I wanted that to come across in these novellas. And we know from studies that have been done that reading character-based fiction actually seems to improve people's empathy. So I think there's comfort to be had from human connections whenever we can get it at this challenging time. But perhaps there's also scope for comfort to come from books and the people in them. This follows on very nicely from the previous question, but it's interesting the way you've put it. The idea of writing as one of the powers that comfort, because it enables us to reflect openly and eventually move to some form of resolution. So there are kind of two parts to that: the reflecting openly and moving to the resolution. And in the great tradition of the Canberra Press Club, I'll do the second part first and then the first part second. So I think there's something immersive about reading a book. Watching a great TV series, streaming a great TV series can be that way too, but there's something neurologically different about reading a book. When you read a book, you take in the words and you process the words and you create the pictures and sounds and everything else in your head. It's a neurologically very active process. You're not just receiving images and sounds. That's what helps it to become immersive. And that's what helps us to separate from our daily lives if we choose to while reading the book. And perhaps that's why resolution at the end of a story is very satisfying, because we've been immersed in the story and committed to the story, and it allows something to finish at a time when there might be things in the world that aren't finishing. There are difficult ongoing issues that we have to deal with. So it's a satisfying encapsulated piece of something that you can appreciate away from all the less satisfying unresolved things that are around. It certainly allows us to reflect as well, because as we engage in that deep way with work that we're reading, it's natural to contemplate the characters, the story, the language, a range of things in the book that we're reading, because it's a very interactive process. So all of that, I think, adds to the comfort aspect that it provides. It provides mental stimulation. It provides separation from anything we want to take a break from, but it can provide a satisfying whole story that we can immerse ourselves deeply into. And I've already mentioned in my previous answer how it works with empathy and how we can connect with the characters, and we can spend the time in someone else's shoes and see how the world works for them. And I think that's a really valuable experience to have too. And it's books can be a great reminder of our shared humanity. As someone who's written 3 collections of short stories and a series of novellas, I think I've nailed my colours to the mast there. And yes, I do think there's a place in writing for novellas and short story collections. The other thing we've got to look at though is there a place in publishing and is there a place in reading? So from the point of view of the place in writing, I think some ideas just need to end up the length they need to end up. Sometimes you can bring 2 ideas together and create something bigger, But there are some ideas that are great for a short story, and some ideas that are perfect over novella length, and some ideas that need to be explored over the length of a novel. So I think in terms of the writing, I think we've got to have the freedom to, it's great to have the freedom to allow something to be the length that it needs to be. But built into the question is an awareness that the publishing industry has some kind of reticence towards fictional forms that aren't as convenient as the novel. And that was one of the things I wanted to explore with my Wisdom Tree series by putting out novellas, because what I thought was, in our regular lives, this is our pre-pandemic lives, when we were leading the 21st century lives that we often are, where we might have work, maybe we have some study, maybe we have children or elderly parents to care for. We've got lots of things in our lives, and we've also got lots of things in our leisure time. We have social media, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have young people have TikTok, we have streaming services. So lots of things are taking up the leisure space in a way that they weren't before. And that means that a lot of us are reading less or allocating less time to reading. So my feeling was that the novella could fit in very well there, and so can the short story. A short story might be 10 or 20 minutes of reading. A novella might be 2 or 3 hours of reading. So you give yourself that movie length period of time and allow yourself to be absorbed by a story. So I think these short forms fit very well with the lives a lot of us lead now. And there are certainly publishers with an interest in them. University of Queensland Press is particularly good at publishing short story collections. And I hope that we'll actually see more novellas and more short stories and short story collections in the future, as people who want to keep up a whole lot of other things in their life also want to make sure that fiction fits in there too, and don't want to always be spreading a novel over weeks and weeks of reading. So if you're the kind of person who is finding books building up on their bedside table waiting for the holidays, then maybe there's a place for novellas and short stories in your life right now. Well, in the eyes of some people who are particularly attached to Zigzag Street, almost certainly not. But that's something I have to accept, and I'm glad they're very attached to Zigzag Street. I think probably 20 years from now, Trent Dalton will be getting this question about Boy Swallow's universe. Graham Simpson already gets this question about the Rosie Project. And I think if you write a book early on that actually catches people's attention and means something to them, it becomes the benchmark by which things like that, by which future books are measured. And you can either let that get to you, or you can be really glad that you had that book that people got attached to. For me, Zigzag Street was a book that came in a run of books that actually sold in healthy numbers, and different people got attached to different ones of those books. In Brisbane, it was particularly Zigzag Street, and I think that was because at the time it was published in 1996, we really hadn't seen many books dealing with Brisbane in a kind of contemporary way, the Brisbane of the 90s there, and seeing it as a normal place, as a place that wasn't something to be contemptuous about. So it's been a great thing that turned out to be a book that mattered a lot to quite a few people, particularly people in Brisbane, but also elsewhere. And it's not so much an eclipse, it more feels like a kind of shadow. And one of those big books can feel like it casts a long shadow, and you can either feel that you're in that shadow or step outside that shadow and try to pursue other things. And I think if I tried to write Zigzag Street now, I'd write it in a different way. It wouldn't be the book that it was. It wouldn't strike the chord that it did. So I'm glad that it is the book that it is. I'm glad that people connected with it in the way that they did. But the closest I've come to trying to rewrite that book effectively in the past few years was when I published Analog Man in 2014. And that was the same tone of book and the same kind of central character, but approaching the age of 50. and it just didn't connect in the same way that Zigzag Street did. I mean, some people read it and loved it, but far fewer people read it than read Zigzag Street. But what I think a writer has to do when they have a book that establishes them like that is either you find yourself following the diminished returns of trying to do more and more versions of that book and doing it less and less well, or having less and less new to say, or you actually just set out to be the best writer that you can be, write the stories that are in you to write, and hope that they connect with people to whom they mean something. And I think technically as a writer, I've learned most of what I've learned after I published Zigzag Street. I think I'm technically a much better writer now. I think the Wisdom Tree novellas are the best of, show me at my best as a writer in terms of my technical capacity so far. They certainly didn't outsell Zigzag Street, but they're a different kind of book. And I'm really glad that Zigzag Street struck the chord that it did, even if I'm trying to write different things now, because it would be crazy for me to try to keep chasing that tail. It's better for me to keep trying to develop as a writer and see who I can catch with anything new that I write now. Cover art and the design of covers of books is such an interesting issue, and often a fraught issue behind the scenes as authors, designers and publishers negotiate about the best way to represent a book. But which one is my favorite cover art? Well, how about that one there? It's not that one, no. But I had to show you that one because you might not have seen it, because that's not the Australian edition. I'm loath to handle it, actually. This is the UK edition of Bachelor Kisses, which came out in 1999. And the cover did cause some kind of stir when it came out. And not just because of the impressive prowess of the cover model and his very obviously fake Encyclopedia of Medicine. I mean, really, look at that Encyclopedia of Medicine. So when that came out, the Evening Standard in London ran a 2-page article headed, "Would you read this book on the tube?" And apparently people were tearing the cover off and reading it on the tube. So I did say to my publisher, I didn't really want a book that would compel people to tear the cover off. They thought it was lad lit. This was in the big lad lit wave, and they thought lads read lad lit. Turns out 2/3 of the readers at least are women, so they got that wrong. So they were kind of trying to pitch it at people who might buy it with a 6-pack of beer. That's not really how books work. So I don't think it really helped. But it was an adventurous cover. It got people talking, and I happen to be in contact now with the guy who designed it, who's now the head of design at a major publishing company. And he contacted me on social media reminiscing about this book cover from long ago. To look at another Bachelor Kisses cover, here's the cover that made me laugh the most. That one. That's the German edition of Bachelor Kisses. And in Germany it's called Assistentenkusse, which means kisses of the assistant, which is really nice because he's the central character is a junior doctor. In German, he's an Assistentarzt, an assistant doctor. But as the editor said, he's also kind of an assistant in life. He's developmental in life. So he is kind of this guy, even though he doesn't look like this guy at all. He doesn't wear glasses. But anyway, I thought, as book covers go, that one stands out a mile away, doesn't it? In a bookstore, or in fact across the street. So I thought that one was very funny, and I went, just go for it. See how that goes. Don't think it went very well, but I just said, see how it goes. If I'm to pick ones that I actually really like, my Wisdom Tree novella covers I really like for a number of reasons. I like the cover art. It's simple, but because they're not big books, it needs to be simple. It can't carry too many concepts on the cover. So the artwork is by Virginia Kraljevich, who's a New Yorker. It's a series of works. The book design is by Sandy Cull. I like the way each of the pieces of artwork kind of connects with the material in the book in a understated way, and the covers all sort of line up very nicely next to each other so that they actually fit as a series. So I like the individual bits of artwork, but I love the design and I love the way the series works there. It's an interesting question, isn't it? How do you know when your book's finished? I've had this conversation with quite a few writers, and particularly emerging writers, who find themselves unable to stop tinkering with what they've got. And probably the key piece of advice I give to them is that there's a difference between continuing to make your book better and just making changes that make your book different. And if there are lots of little differences, but they're not improving the book, you've probably reached the point where you've done all you can, and the book probably needs a new set of eyes. For me, in practice, I go through a lot of planning beforehand. I write my first draft into a detailed outline that's typically a quarter of the length of the whole thing. And so I've got it all mapped out. So I know how my first draft is going to go. I can diverge from that if I need to. And if new ideas come up, but I don't need to find them as I'm going. So I stick with that plan, and I get to the end of the first draft, then I put it away for a while, then I go back to it. And when I go back to it to write another draft, my objective isn't just how am I going to make this better. It's I read through it thinking, what do I need to attend to in the next draft? And I look at the journey of the central character, the way I've told the story, how I've revealed things. I ask some specific questions like that. And through that, that kind of sets up the business for the next edit. And then I'll look through the manuscript that I've got and I'll work out where I'm going to do that in the draft, and I'll go back in and do it. So I'll try to make it a kind of finite process, and then maybe I'll put it aside again and have another look at it a few weeks later and think, is there still more business to do? Are there things that I've overdone or underdone? Are there things that aren't quite hitting the mark? And then I'll go in again with the specific purpose of trying to hit those marks and seeing what I can do. But I try to avoid the temptation to just keep going back in and moving the commas around. And I reach a point where I think this needs eyes on it other than mine. This needs expert objective input from an editor, from an agent, from someone like that. And then I'll send it off to them. And then they'll send me back in and there'll be another draft. And then they'll send me back in after that to fiddle with lots of little bits. So as far as I'm concerned, when I get to that point, I'm not tinkering endlessly with the manuscript. I just need to finish it. I need to get it done. And I need them to have enough mercy to let me stop because we've tinkered with enough commas enough. So for me, I try to have a process that lets me take some kind of control over the editing, but then an editor comes in and sends me back in as much as I can possibly bear. And then at some point we both agree that the journey is done and we need to send it off to be typeset. The official answer to this question is no. But that answer is a lie. Because in the mid-1980s, I might have self-published some very developmental poetry that mostly reflected the crushes I had on people round about that time. But let's pretend that never happened, and let's erase the last 30 seconds from our memories and go with me not having done that with that book. And it's not that I've got anything against self-publishing. I think the self-publisher takes on a significant workload by taking on several different parts of the book production and distribution process. But there's a high return there for you if you do that. So I've met people who've self-published very successfully, but they've mostly self-published very successfully because they've been targeting particular niche markets that they can actually target better than publishers can target. So if your market is thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people that you've got better access to than a publisher, then self-publishing can be a really good way to go. I tend to work with publishers who will let me focus on the thing that I am most excited about doing, which is the writing, and the other bit that I'm slightly excited about doing, which is traveling around talking about myself when the book comes out at their expense, which is not bad at all. But I find I'm not a designer. I think I need design left to experts. I'm not a distributor, and I'm happy to leave the retail parts of it to other people who I think bring more to that than I do. And for that, I of course get a smaller percentage of the sales than I would if I was self-publishing. So I think self-publishing works very well for people who have got great access to the markets for their books. Self-publishing also is of course a different game now that we've got CreateSpace and other ways of developing quality printed works at economical rates. I think that's very exciting. And of course ebooks, it costs very little to self-publish an ebook. The challenge with that, with ebooks, is that the Kindle store has well over 5 million titles, and how do people discover you there? That's one of the things, is it's a very easy place to get lost. So it's never been easier to publish, never been easier to self-publish, but possibly also never been easier to get lost in the massive, infinite bazaar that is the Kindle store and the world of digital publishing. So, but I think it's a very rewarding thing for some people, and you can create very attractive books self-publishing, and if you've got access to your book's primary market, then I think it can be a great way to go. But as I've said, my official answer is that I haven't done it, but just between you and me, maybe I tried it once and maybe I ended up with a lot of boxes of bad poetry under my house. Well, flash fiction is a very interesting area to work in, and I've got a book here, Captives by Angela Meyer. That's a small book of flash fiction, and very nicely done on the inside as well, with an occasional illustration, nice and comfortable to read, but a book that fits in a pocket. So when it comes to marketing something like that, one of the things to consider, I don't know how big your volumes of flash fiction are, just thinking of the person who asked the question, but doing something this size can fit on a bookstore countertop, and if you can manage to sell it for $10 or less, maybe you've got opportunities to move your product in a way that novels don't move, as a kind of interesting, small, compact edition with a lot of interesting experiences in it. There's about 100 pieces in there. Flash fiction also gives you opportunities. You're likely to be able to turn out more individual pieces over the course of a year than someone who's writing something novel-sized. So therefore you get more entries in competitions, more chances to approach publishers who work in this particular area. So I think there are those advantages there, as you get to build up your CV faster potentially because you're entering more things. And then you want to connect with communities online, I think, who take an interest in that kind of work, and see if they can take an interest in your work. Also, if you're writing flash fiction, it's a thing you can give away. You can sometimes post, if you're promoting a book of yours, you can actually post an entire story as a Facebook post to get people's attention. Also, you can record it as a kind of audio soundbite. Some flash fiction might take 30 seconds, might take a minute, and that is really transportable. So I think use the strengths of the genre, if that's the area that you work in, to promote the work that way. As far as how I market my work, if I'm working with a major publisher, I kind of have to fit with their machine and the way that machine works, though I will of course make suggestions. I had more room to move when I was promoting my Wisdom Tree series, because I was working with a micro publisher on the print books and the ebooks in Australia, a different micro publisher on the ebooks internationally, and with Audible on the audiobooks, and they all agreed to work together. So what we tried to do was make a virtue of the product we have, and I think that's what you always got to do, is look at the product you've got and think, what opportunities does this give me? And in the case of those novellas, I said to Audible, let's cast it like an Australian TV drama series. So we had Reese Muldoon doing one, Guyton Grantley, William McGuinness, people like that. And then I said, could we have an about 30 to 45 second soundbite that I will select, that each time one of them comes out, when a new novella comes out as a paper book, ebook, and audiobook, I want to release this soundbite with this actor reading from it as something people can listen to and can share on social media. So I think things like that, looking at innovative ways of doing it, and there are probably far more innovative ways than that, but looking at what your particular product offers, and in terms of particular ways of getting the word out there and getting the word spread around. Because the thing is, we are all competing not just with thousands and thousands of other authors and millions of other books in the world, we're competing with a whole lot of other entertainment options these days. So anything you can do that you can, where you can take something from your product and have people spread it around for you, puts you in a much better position. It's a really interesting question, and I should perhaps have reflected more on my own trajectory and have a clear answer to that in my own head. I think there are different things that felt sort of defining for me. Maybe the first one was the Sunday Mail Limerick competition in 1975 when I won $5 for a limerick. And $5 for 5 lines, that said to me, what kind of a job is this if you get that sort of awesome money? So that stuck with me. I think the first time I heard something from a reader who was not someone I knew, someone I had any connection with, that made me realize that my books, this was a long time after the Sunday Mail Limerick, this was probably around the time of After January and Zigzag Street in 1996. My books were out in the world, but this actually told me my books were out in the world. I started getting letters from people, because this was in the days of letters. And those letters, I've still got those letters. I don't get letters on paper anymore, so they're very special to me. But to see books connecting with readers here and in other countries told me that I'd got something right for someone at least. And that made me start to feel like a writer. But I still had an element of imposter syndrome, as writers often do. You're there thinking, and is this thing I'm writing amazing, or is it just awful? And what's going to happen if it ever gets published? And then it gets published and people like it. And at some level you're thinking, I've got away with it, rather than, yes, I can do this. And I think it wasn't until around about my 7th book was published, that was Perfect Skin in the year 2000, that I actually came to accept that I'd been through the cycle enough times now, and enough people had read my books, that maybe this was a thing that I could do to satisfy at least some people, and that I could do as some kind of job. And I had to accept that maybe I wasn't an imposter, and maybe this was going to work for me. And I think the moment that I had that realization was just before my novel Perfect Skin came out. And it's got a bright yellow cover. And I went to the Somerset Celebration of Literature on the Gold Coast. And this was just before it came out. And they got advanced copies of it. And as I went into the quadrangle there with the bookstore on the other side, I looked across to the bookstore, and what I saw was this huge phalanx of yellow books, this huge array of books of mine with my cover there. And I thought, look at that. They don't have that unless they think they're going to sell it. And I thought, maybe this is what I'm getting to do now. Maybe this is my job. And that was a very exciting moment. And I've loved the fact that this has got to be my job ever since, whether the books are selling or selling significant numbers or more moderate numbers. It's a real privilege to get to do this as a job, and to keep exploring each new story and keep trying to solve the puzzle that each new story presents as. So I'm hoping I'm going to get to keep doing it. And thank you for your questions. They've been great questions. They've really made me think. And it's been exciting to get to include this and include this interaction with you as part of my COVID-19 time at home. And I hope your time at home is going well. Stay well, look after the people around you, and thank you for listening. And thank you very much to James and the team at the Moreton Bay Regional Council Libraries for coming up with this great idea.